Protocol and its second commitment period is a very important piece of Durban, but it's not the only, so we can talk about the other pieces. But yes, from where we stand, it's very clear that countries have moved over the past week to discussing no longer whether there's going to be a second commitment period, but rather how is this second commitment period going to be brought forward, and that is what they're discussing right now.
The EU has also presented a roadmap at this point in time. They've come out saying that over half of the countries have agreed on this roadmap. What are the key facets that they put on the table?
Well, what the EU has done is they have put a certain number of conditions for their engaging on a second commitment period, but that is not the only offer on the table. The fact is that what countries are looking at are a wealth of offers and different options that they have in order to bring about a second commitment period. And the good news is that it is not only the EU, but rather that there are many other options, and that countries are really looking in a very concerted and structured way at these options and coming forward.
We've had half of the basic group, which is of course Brazil, South Africa, India and China agreeing to perhaps a legally binding agreement with South Africa and Brazil, saying they will agree to it on the basis that they won't have the same stringent conditions as developed nations. But of course it isn't just about South Africa and Brazil, it's about China and India, and really the power struggle that we're seeing playing out at COP17 between the US and China and India. What are your views on what's taken place between those three nations?
Well, that is the second very important piece of Durban, because it's very clear that a second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol is not going to be able to happen unless there is movement on the other side toward launching a process toward a broader mitigation framework that could end up in a legally binding agreement at some point in time. And there we also have good news, because countries are very seriously considering what that process would look like, what the timelines are for that, as well as the individual participation. So it's a very hot topic right now, and is being considered side by side with the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol.
But looking at that global roadmap, because that of course is key, because given the fact that China and India, the two large emitters, are excluded from the Kyoto Protocol's Annex 1 countries, we should be focusing on what that new agreement would look like. The USA is saying that they won't commit to anything legally binding unless they know what the terms of that agreement would look like. Is that not fair enough?
Well, but that is exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about what would that framework look like, what would that legal outcome look like. So I'm expecting that we will have good news at the end of this.
So you're expecting us to see some form of roadmap, basically, towards a global agreement. Is that what you're saying?
I'm expecting us to see a very carefully crafted and very well balanced political agreement here, on the one hand on a second commitment period that then opens the door for a process toward a legal outcome on the other side.
One positive is that China has come out saying that they will possibly agree to something post-2020. In the interim, what is science telling us we need to do right now? How dire is the situation from your feedback from the scientists that we've spoken to and heard from at COP17? What is the situation looking like from the climate perspective?
There actually is a very broad agreement to the fact that all countries must be bound after 2020, so it's not just China. There's a very, very broad agreement, and in fact there are many countries that are saying that countries need to be bound much sooner than 2020. And the reason why they say it is, of course, because there is a large gap between the science, or what the science establishes ought to be the reality, and what countries are able to do at this point. So because of that gap, and of course because of the situation in the low-lying states, in the LDCs, in the least developed countries, in the African region, of course they are very, very impatient for something that is going to be much more robust in a time period that is as soon as possible. But that is exactly the discussion here.
Let's talk about the Green Climate Fund, because of course that is key for Africa, given those green dollars are so needed in order to adapt to the changes in the environment, and also of course mitigate further degradation of the environment. What type of progress have you seen being made on the Green Climate Fund?
The Green Climate Fund is another very important outcome from Durban, where I'm also confident that we will have the launch of the Green Climate Fund. Governments have been working here since last week very steadily on identifying the few issues on which there was a discrepancy and on building together toward being able to bridge those discrepancies and come to agreement. So we're almost there. I'm very confident that that will also emerge from Durban.
It's been reported that the US has stated that they're wanting international finance institutions and corporations also to contribute to this fund. What is the structure of the fund likely to look like at this point in time? Is that likely to happen?
We don't know yet, and that actually was not one of the issues that were on the agenda to be discussed here in Durban. What was on the agenda is to launch the very basic structure that is there, and then go in next year into deciding where the financing is going to come from. So that will be part of the work program of governments next year. What is very clear is that the fund cannot be sourced from just one single source, that there has to be a basket of different sources of funding, and that it will have to be used very, very strategically to leverage further capital and to bring down the unreasonable risk that many of these investments bring.